Parkland, Florida, a calm suburb, would on Valentine's Day become a day of mourning and loss. This occurred due to the actions of an autistic kid, 19-year-old Nikolas Jacob Cruz. He experienced hard things in life and was struggling badly with his mental health. If you know of any resources that could be of assistance to people dealing with hard things as well, please bring them up to light. Please keep in mind as well that I will be discussing a delicate, sensitive, and disturbing topic that may not be suitable to all audiences. Viewer discretion or listener discretion is advised. Nikolas, whose nickname was Nick, was born on September 24, 1998, in Margate, Florida. His biological mother, Brenda Woodard, was a sex worker who had a drug addiction. When Nikolas was born, he had an older sister, Danielle Woodard. This sister was born with a deformed tongue due to her mother's drug addiction and spoke in a strange way. Nick would then have a baby brother, Zachary Cruz, nicknamed Zach. Each child had a different dad, and their mother, Brenda, never knew who they were, due to the constant sex she would have. Brenda was white, therefore it is easy to know what was most likely the race of the children's fathers. She spent a big part of her life in and out of jail for misdemeanors of drug and sex worker crimes. Nick's biological father is believed to have been white, his sister Danielle's Hispanic, and his brother Zach's black. Brenda lost custody of two of her children, Nick and Zach, due to her constant drug use and neglect to them. They were placed in foster care, then adopted by a couple, Roger and Linda Cruz. Roger died at the age of 67 on August 11, 2004, when Nick was 5 years old and Zach was 4. He passed away at his home. Nick discovered his body and informed Linda. Linda then dialed 911 and emergency personnel arrived. He was pronounced dead at the family home. From that day on, Nick's childhood would revolve around Linda, now his single adoptive mother. Nick grew up with disciplinary issues and was diagnosed with autism at the age of 5. As he got older, he became fascinated with guns and video games. His mother, Linda, would most times get him whatever he wanted, including rifles and handguns. Then on November 1st, 2017, his mother, Linda, died of the flu in Florida's West Boca Medical Center at the age of 68. Nikolas then became lonely and depressed. He had no friends and grew up being bullied by his brother Zach. Zach did have friends, ones which would bully Nick as well. Due to their adoptive parents now being dead, Zach and Nick moved into the foster care system. Their first foster family took them both in. However, Nick would behave violently and would soon be kicked out of that family. He was in possession of many firearms that his deceased adoptive mother Linda would buy for him. Nick at one point pointed the gun at the foster mother, which led her to call the cops.
Before, so it's not the first time, and he did that to his mom. His mom died.
So the 19-year-old, he's obsessed with weapons, guns. He has many of them. I told him the rules are there are no weapons on my property.
I got mad and I started punching walls and stuff, and then a kid came at me and threw me on the ground.
The situation calmed down, and he was not charged with any crimes. However, he was not allowed to live with that family anymore. Therefore, Nick and his brother separated. Nick then moved into another foster family's home. He had several social media accounts, posting pictures of him holding knives and firearms. He would as well post messages relating to violence. One of them even stated that he was cutting himself. This led the FBI to start investigating him. Nick had been attending the majority Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, but was expelled due to various behavioral issues. He would bring knives to school and then have them in his lunchbox. The last behavioral issue he had was when he got into a fight and pulled out a knife at the person he was fighting. He then gained the high school credits he missed by obtaining his GED with the help of learning centers. On February 14, 2018, it was Valentine's Day in the US. It was a sunny day, and most residents in Parkland, Florida, thought it would be a positive day. However, it was not a positive day for many families. On this day, Nick took an Uber to the majority Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. He had been carrying a case that looked like a guitar case but was purchased from a store called Cabela's. This case had a rifle inside it. Once he arrived at the school, he walked through a door that had been left open and took the rifle out of the case. A student walked by and caught him loading this rifle. Nick then said, "You better get out of here, things are going to get messy." This student ran off and went to the school's main office to inform the administration about what had just occurred. With a fully loaded rifle, Nick started shooting up the school. People inside the building evacuated, and the fire alarms went off due to the dust that had gone into the smoke detectors. His gun jammed, and he tossed it on the ground, running away. Nick blended in with the students and then fled the scene. He went inside a nearby Walmart and got a drink from their Subway restaurant. He then walked to McDonald's nearby and sat on one of the tables with a student whom had as well fled the school. This student was the brother of one of the people whom Nikolas Cruz had shot. Nick asked him for a ride, but he refused to give him one because he had not driven to school and was waiting for his family to pick him up. Nick then left the McDonald's and walked towards Coral Springs, Florida. The Broward County Sheriff's Office then spotted and arrested him. He did not resist arrest, but did speak to the officers and appeared to be unaware of where he was going or what was going on. Nick was then taken to the Broward County Sheriff's Office's station in Parkland, Florida, and interrogated. He confessed to the school shooting and claimed that he heard voices telling him to kill. His brother Zach headed to the station to speak with him and apologized for the bullying he put him throughout their childhoods. Nick broke down crying. After a long interrogation, Nick was taken to the Broward County Jail. On his way there, the foster mom he was living with approached him and looked at him in a shameful way. She shouted out, "Really?" He then murmured back, "Sorry." The following day, Nick appeared before Broward County Magistrate Kim Malika, who read the charges and ordered that he be held in jail until he faced a state judge. The charges read included 17 counts of premeditated first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted first-degree murder. Michael Satz, the county's lead prosecutor who took on the case, claimed that these charges were not enough to punish Nikolas Cruz for the incident that had occurred. Therefore, this case was shown to a grand jury. This grand jury would then indict him on more serious offenses, upgrading his premeditated murder charges to capital murder and more severe crimes of attempted murder. Once these charges were filed, Cruz's public defense attorney, Melissa McNeil, filed not guilty pleas on his behalf. On the same day that these pleas were filed, Judge Elizabeth Scherer officially denied him bond, meaning that he would continue to await trial in jail. Prosecutor Satz announced that he would seek the death penalty against Nikolas. 22 lawsuits were filed against the Broward County School Board and their sheriff's office, claiming negligence and accusing them of failing to take measures to stop this shooter. These lawsuits were settled in 2022. Another federal lawsuit was filed against the FBI. This other lawsuit was settled in 2021. Many officials of the respondent police force and school district were called to resign from their positions. In November 2018, months after the shooting, Nikolas Cruz got into a fight with one of the jail's corrections officers, Raymond Beltran, and attempted to take his taser. Beltran had told Cruz to stop dragging his sandals. Cruz then flipped him off and struck him. The county sheriff's office investigated this incident and chose to have Cruz be held criminally accountable. They charged him with a felony of battery on a law enforcement officer and 3 misdemeanors of attempted battery on a law enforcement officer. His defense attorney filed not guilty pleas in this case as well. 3 years passed and Cruz continued to await trial for both cases. He was not granted an insanity plea in any of his cases. Prosecutor Michael Satz refused to grant Cruz any plea deals for either cases. In July 2021, Nikolas Cruz was found competent to stand trial in both cases. His battery trial was set for November 2021. Jury selection took place, but only lasted for a few days. Cruz's defense attorney became ill and was unable to continue attending the trial. Therefore, the jury selection was delayed. However, the rest of the defense team thought that it would not be possible to have Cruz be acquitted in this case. Therefore, he withdrew his not guilty plea and pleaded guilty to these charges instead. He waived his right to a pre-sentence investigation and would be sentenced the next day. Cruz also requested to withdraw his not guilty plea for the shooting case as well before the sentencing. The following day, Nikolas Cruz pleaded guilty to all of the charges in the shooting case. Shortly after, Judge Elizabeth Scherer imposed his sentence for the battery case. He received 24 years and 6 months in state prison. Judge Scherer sentenced him for the felony and had the misdemeanors be added onto it. Nikolas Cruz was not done yet. He would have to go to trial for the shooting case and have a jury decide whether he would get the death penalty or not. His defense team tried to remove that death penalty from the case, but Judge Scherer refused to do so. The trial was delayed several times. In April 2022, the jury selection finally started and took months to conclude. In June of that year, the jury was seated and opening arguments would start the following month. In the opening arguments, Prosecutor Satz detailed the shooting, claiming that Nikolas Cruz's crimes were premeditated and that he knew what he was doing. The prosecution would take the rest of the months to represent their case and display evidence of the shooting. The injured victims and family members of the deceased victims testified. The prosecution would then rest their case. The next month, it was time for the defense to present their case. Cruz's lead attorney, Melissa McNeil, claimed that he was being described as a monster, but really, the massacre that occurred was not his fault. He grew up in an unhealthy environment and had an unhealthy mindset. His autism was brought up in testimonies, and violent behaviors of him growing up were mentioned. The drug and alcohol abuse of his biological mother was as well mentioned, and the neglect of his stepmother. The evidence showed that Nikolas Cruz had a damaged brain, which was caused by his mother Brenda's substance abuse. A friend of Brenda was called to testify and detailed their careers as sex workers and their substance abuse. Cruz's sister, Danielle Woodard, was as well called to testify and detailed her life growing up with her mother, Brenda. Danielle claimed that Brenda would make her pee in a piece of tin foil in order to trick the probation officers and have them think she was sober. This was because Brenda was on probation And if the officers found out she was still doing drugs, she would have been locked up once again. The fact that Danielle had a deformed tongue and disorderly speaking due to her mother's drug abuse during pregnancy was brought up. Danielle was in an inmate jumpsuit because she had been in the Miami-Dade County Jail, awaiting trial for an unrelated carjacking case in which she would later be sentenced to 15 years in state prison for after pleading guilty following a bargain. After nearly a month of the defense's testimony, they rested their case as well, and it was time for the prosecution's rebuttal. Only the prosecution chose to have a rebuttal witness. This was done in September of that year. More experts were called to testify in order to leave out Cruz's mental health issues. After nearly another month of testimony, the case is concluded and it was time for closing arguments. Cruz refused to testify at his trial. Therefore, the closing arguments immediately begun. In the closing arguments, Prosecutor Satz asked the jury to review all of the evidence and to recommend a death sentence, because Nikolas Cruz planned and calculated all of his behaviors the day of the shooting. He told the jurors to have their focus be on the cell phone footage and recordings of him claiming that he would be the next school shooter. Then defense attorney McNeil spoke about the substance abuse of Cruz's biological mother and claimed that she really took a big toll on his life and that he could not control his behaviors. McNeil asked the jurors to punish him to life in prison instead of the death penalty and told them that this was a once-in-a-lifetime decision and that they could one day regret sentencing him to death. The jurors then had instructions read to them and were sent to deliberate. It took 2 days for the jury to reach a verdict. 1 out of the 12 jurors recommended that Cruz be sentenced to life in prison. The rest of them had recommended death. However, due to one of the jurors not recommending the death penalty, the verdict would automatically be life, and Cruz would be saved from execution. Families of the deceased victims complained about the verdict and told the media that he did deserve to be sentenced to death. The final sentencing hearing of Nikolas Cruz started on November 1st, 2022. He waived his right to any pre-sentence investigation. This hearing would last many days. All of the victims injured in the shooting made impact statements, as well as the families of the deceased ones. On Friday, November 4th, 3 days after the sentencing hearing started, Judge Elizabeth Scherer sentenced Nikolas Cruz to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charges. She imposed sentences of 10 to 20 years for each attempted murder charge. Therefore, Nikolas Cruz was sentenced to life in prison without parole, with 340 additional years. After his sentence, he was placed in an undisclosed facility that the Florida Department of Corrections has kept secret due to concerns for his safety. However, social media groups believe that he is in the prison in Rayford, Florida. Rest in peace to everyone who passed away due to this incident. Thank you for listening, and please share this podcast to someone you know who may be interested in true crime. Don't forget to follow the podcast, subscribe to its channel, and like this episode for more content. Till next time, goodbye.